Welcome, wary traveler, to another journey through the quiet corners of history. Tonight, we sail into the frozen seas of medieval times, aboard ships where pirates braved icy winds, and dark nights not in search of gold, but for survival, warmth, and rest. Have you ever wondered, how did pirates sleep on these ships without freezing to death? How did they find comfort, safety, and even dreams, while the cold ocean stretched endlessly around them? Tonight, for the next 2 hours, we'll drift together into the gentle world of these sailors, exploring their routines, their hammocks, their blankets, and the quiet resilience that carried them through the long winter nights. Before we set sail, if you enjoy these slow, meditative journeys into history, consider subscribing and joining our calm community of explorers. A gentle click on the subscribe button and the notification bell will ensure that more stories like this reach your evenings, helping you drift into peaceful rest. Once the story concludes, the spoken narration will fade into relaxing, soft, medieval-inspired music, letting the calm linger and carrying you deeper into sleep. So, settle into your own cozy hammock, wrap yourself in warmth, and let the gentle sway of history carry you as we begin our journey aboard a medieval pirate ship. The night had settled over the winter sea like a vast, shimmering cloak, heavy, quiet, and endlessly deep, far from any visible shore, where no lantern from land could reach and no distant bell could be heard. A lone medieval pirate ship drifted with the slow patience of an old creature. Its wooden hull groaned softly, stretching against the cold like tired bones, while the waves whispered along its sides, rising and falling in a rhythm older than the ship itself. Above it all, the sky stretched in calm silence, an ocean of stars gazing down as if keeping watch over the weary sailors resting within the wooden vessel. The air was crisp and biting, yet gentler now than it had been in the hours before. The wind, once sharp enough to sting the skin, had quieted into a mild, wandering breeze, passing through ropes, sails, and the ship's rigging with a low hum, almost musical sigh, soft enough to lull even the most restless soul. The lanterns that hung from the beams flickered in small golden circles, their flames trembling with every light sway of the deck. These dim lights offered not brilliance, but comfort, a warm reminder of shelter amid the vast cold expanse. They illuminated patches of the ship's deck, revealing the texture of salt-worn wood, the loops of coiled ropes, and the shadowed shapes of barrels tied securely for the long journey. Everything seemed quiet, slow, and touched by a dreamlike stillness. A faint mist hovered near the water's surface, moving in gentle ribbons along the dark waves. It softened the edges of the horizon, blending sea and sky into one single, calm world. And in that world, the pirate ship floated as though held by invisible hands, rocked, cradled, embraced. Though the word pirate often summons loud tales of clashing swords and roaring cannons, the truth of most nights at sea was far different, especially on winter nights. The men aboard the ship were weary travelers more than anything else. Drifters bound together by necessity, habit, and the long, mysterious ocean roads that stretched before them. Out here, far from ports and far from any immediate danger, they were not warriors. They were simply sailors trying to rest, wrapped in the chilly breath of the sea. The deck was almost empty now. Only a single figure walked near the stern, moving slowly, taking careful steps so the boards would not creak too loudly. His lantern cast a small sphere of light around him, revealing his wool-lined coat and the gentle steam of his breath drifting into the night. He was the chosen watchman, one of those who guarded the quiet hours so that others could sleep below deck without worry. His boots touched the planks with a steady, relaxing rhythm, matching the soft kisses of waves on the hull. Every once in a while, he lifted his eyes toward the horizon, though there was nothing to see except the endless stretch of star-sprinkled darkness. He wasn't searching for danger tonight. He was absorbing the silence. For sailors who spent much of their lives under the open sky, nights like these were a gift nights, when the sea behaved tenderly and the cold, though sharp, was manageable with good wool on the back and steady breath in the lungs. He paused near the rail and leaned slightly forward, listening. The sea had its own language, and sailors learned to interpret it almost like reading a book. Tonight, it spoke in soft murmurs, No storm brewing, no waves rising, no strange shifts of wind. Who's to handle a patient rocking that seemed to invite both men and ship to rest deeply? Below deck, the atmosphere was different, warmer, and shielded from the wind. But Chapter 1 stays above, in the quiet openness, setting the mood for the long tale ahead. For now, we linger on the exposed deck, where cold pressed against the wooden beams and left thin crystals of frost along the edges of barrels and lines. The frost shimmered faintly whenever a lantern's glow touched it, like tiny frozen stars sprinkled by some playful spirit. The ship's masts rose high, vanishing into the deep navy of the night sky. They moved gently with each swell, their ropes and rigging producing soft, familiar sound-stide chords humming quietly as if sighing in their sleep. The sails, furled for the night, hung still and heavy, resting like folded wings. There was no rush, no destination pressing on the crew, only time, slow and unhurried, stretching luxuriously across the dark water. The ocean itself smelt cold and clean, a blend of salt, winter air, soaked timber, and the faint scent of tar from the ship's seams. These smells were part of a sailor's life, sometimes harsh, but tonight soothing, grounding, and oddly comforting. For those who had spent years on the sea, the smell of the ship became home, just as familiar as the hearth smoke of land dwellers. Somewhere near the bow, a loose length of rope tapped intermittently against a plank, producing a gentle, repetitive knock that blended into the peaceful soundscape. The watchman did not bother fixing it. He knew the sound was soft enough to rock others into deeper sleep. A small cluster of clouds drifted across the stars, dimming their glow for a moment before passing on. Asteamobed, the ship slipped into a slightly darker shadow, the world narrowing too, only the lanterns aboard and the quiet voice of the sea. The night was peaceful now, but the cold had been cruel earlier. The crew had worked through a biting wind that clawed at their faces, stiffened their fingers, and forced them to keep moving just to keep warm. They had tied down the sails with numb hands and hauled heavy ropes that felt even heavier in the freezing air. When the work finally ended, they retreated to the lower deck, grateful for the thin shelter offered by the wooden walls. But those scenes belonged to later chapters. Right now, as the ship drifts under the softened winter wind, the world seems to breathe slower. Even the waves appear gentler, rising only enough to sway the vessel, not enough to disturb, only enough to soothe. The watchman closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the cold air graze his cheeks. His heart matched the calm rhythm of the sea, slow and steady. He knew his companions were resting just below his feet, wrapped in layers of wool and coarse blankets, finding warmth inside a wooden shelter that somehow managed to carry them across the vast, icy world. But above, on the open deck, the night belonged to silence. It belonged to the sea, and it belonged to the old wooden ship, rocking patiently, guarding the dreams of the weary sailors sleeping within its belly. Here, in this quiet and ancient calm, the long story of how pirates slept on survived. The winter sea had a nature all its own, powerful, unhurried, and utterly indifferent to the comfort of those who crossed it. As the pirate ship drifted farther into open waters, the cold deepened with a quiet determination, settling over everything like a thick, invisible frost. It crept through the rigging, crawled along the planks, and seeped into even the smallest cracks between wooden boards. No place on the ship was truly free from it, and every sailor who lived aboard knew that the cold was a constant companion, sometimes gentle, sometimes merciless. Long before the crew settled into their hammocks for the night, they felt the cold tightening around them like a slow, steady tightening of ropes. It did not strike suddenly. Instead, it arrived in layers. First came the soft, lingering, chill, the kind that brushed the skin like a cold fingertip. Then the deeper cold followed, soaking into clothing and sliding under collars and cuffs. And finally, the sharp, bone-deep cold settled in, the sort that made a man's breath turn into drifting white mist and stiffened his hands even inside thick woolen gloves. The open waters of winter were vast and unforgiving. There were no forests to break the wind, no valleys to hide in, and no warm stone walls to trap heat. Out here, the wind traveled unbroken for miles, gathering strength as it crossed endless distances. When it reached the ship, it reached with full force, sweeping across the deck, rattling the masts, and tugging at the tattered edges of old sails. To the crew, The wind was both a companion and a challenge. It carried their vessel forward, pushing it gently along the ocean's long waves, but it also stole warmth whenever it pleased. A man standing watch could feel the cold press against him like a second skin, chilling him through even the thickest coat. During daylight hours, the winter sun provided a small measure of warmth, though its pale light struggled to make much difference. But at night, the cold sharpened. It thickened in the air, clung to breath, and made every surface slick with a thin glaze of frost. Barrels that had been warm to the touch earlier in the day became cold as stone. Coils of rope grew stiff and brittle, and planks glistened faintly as frost formed along their edges. Even beneath the deck, where the wind could not reach, the cold found its way in. It seeped through wooden planks and crept along the beams. It gathered in the corners. It clung to the hammocks and the blankets. Though the lanterns below cast warm light, the warmth itself was thin, unable to fully overcome the winter sea. But this chapter remains, with the world above deck a world, defined by vastness, chill, and the quiet strength of the ocean itself. Cold had a sound, too. On these nights, the creaking of wood grew sharper, more brittle. Ropes tightened with small, high-pitched twangs. Even the waves made a different sound and winter less boisterous, more deliberate. They rose and fell, slowly, as if conserving energy, brushing against the ship with cold, heavy hands. The water itself seemed darker during the winter season. Deep blues grew into near black shadows, rippling gently under the moonlight. The surface looked smooth, but beneath it lay a cold so severe that any man who fell overboard would succumb within minutes. This was a truth every sailor carried in his heart, even if no one spoke of it. The cold waters were a reminder to step carefully, to hold the rail tightly, and to move with respect upon the deck. The pirates knew these dangers well. Many of them had grown up near coastlines, familiar with the bite of the sea air, the way cold winds could wear at one's strength, but nothing compared to nights in the open ocean, where winter felt more expansive, more commanding. Out here, one could feel very small, just a handful of men, and an old wooden ship floating atop a world of cold, silent water. Despite the biting wind, the sea had a surprising serenity to it. The waves were steady, rising and rolling hills that lifted the ship gently before lowering it again. The movement was slow, rhythmic, and strangely comforting. It rocked the vessel like a cradle, a motion so familiar that sailors often felt anxious when the sea was calm. On nights like this, the rocking was subtle, peaceful, and constant, something the crew could rely upon, even as the wind tried to steal their warmth. From to deck, one could see their breath drift upward like pale smoke. It mingled with the slight haze hovering above the water, disappearing softly into the night. The cold numbed noses, reddened cheeks, and made every inhalation feel almost sharp. Yet this very harshness also carried a sense of clarity. The air was so fresh and clean that it felt like drinking from a mountain spring. The ship's timbers seemed to shrink ever so slightly as they cooled, causing occasional soft pops and groan sounds that blended into the nighttime quiet. These noises were familiar, almost comforting, proof that the vessel was alive in its own way, responding to the cold just as the crew did. Lanterns hung along the deck offered small pockets of golden light, but they did little to chase away the cold. Instead, their glow created islands of warmth only for the eyes. A sailor passing by, one could feel the heat only faintly, a mere whisper at arm's length. Still, the lanterns created a sense of safety. They allowed men to see their path, avoid icy spots, and feel reassured that they were not entirely swallowed by the darkness. Beyond the edges of the lantern light, the night grew thick and velvety. The line between sky and sea blurred, and distant waves shimmered faintly under the stars. The heavens themselves were brilliant, scattered with constellations that sailors used to navigate Tandwich. On nights like this, seemed to hang low enough to touch. The stars were old companions. In the winter sky, they gleamed with extra clarity, as if the cold air polished their light. Each one flickered gently above the sleeping ship, watching over it silently. Many sailors believed the stars guided them not just by direction but by presence, coming, steady, eternal. And so, the cold was not entirely an enemy. It brought danger, yes, but it also brought beauty. It shaped the world into something quiet, still, and almost sacred. The harshness of the open waters created a unique kind of peace, one that wrapped itself around the ship in the dark hours of the night. For the pirates aboard, the cold was simply part of life. They did not fight it. They respected it. They endured it. And in their endurance, they found a strange comfort, knowing that every sailor on every ship, across every sea, bowed to the same winter wind. Tonight, the cold ruled the world beyond the wooden walls of the ship, and yet, within the quiet, creaking vessel, sailors found their rest wrapped in wool, rocking with the sea, trusting that dawn would come. Life aboard a medieval pirate ship was not a whirlwind of constant battles or booming cannons, as later tales would suggest. Instead, it was a slow, steady rhythm, one shaped by the daily demands of the sea, the tools of survival, and the endless work required to keep an old wooden vessel moving through the winter waters. Far from the shore, where no village bell marked the hours, the crew moved according to the quiet clock of sunrise, tide, weather, and habit. Their days were long, uncomplicated, and almost meditative in their repetition. Each morning began not with an alarm, but with the natural creaking of the ship as it shifted under the first pale light of dawn. The wooden planks warmed slightly under the returning sun, and the cold that had pressed so sharply through the night loosened its grip, if only by a little. One by one, the sailors woke, climbing out of their hammocks with slow movements and stiff joints. Sleep had restored what energy it could, but the demands of the sea always took more than it returned. The morning air still crisp, still touched by the bite of winter, greeted them as they emerged onto the deck. Some rubbed warmth back into their hands, some stretched quietly, and others simply stood for a moment, letting the fresh salt air fill their lungs before the day's tasks began. There was no leisurely idle time. Even peaceful days required work to keep the ship alive. The first and most constant task was tending to the ropes. Pirates, like any sailors, relied entirely on ropes to control their sails and navigate the sea. These ropes, thick, coarse, and always exposed to wind and salt, needed constant mending. Fibers frayed, knots loosened, dampness crept into every twist, and so it was common to see 2 or 3 sailors seated along the rail, carefully rebraiding strands, tightening knots, and rubbing the ropes with tar to keep them strong against the winter weather. The smell of tar was ever present, mixing with the scent of sea air and damp timber. It clung to the fingers, stained the cuffs of coats, and seeped into every line of rope, giving the ship its distinctive aroma. Tall, strong, the smell was familiar, comforting even, a reminder that the vessel was alive and tended by capable hands. Nearby, others scraped the deck with long, wooden-handled tools. This daily cleaning, known among sailors as holy stoning, involved scrubbing the planks to keep them smooth and free of salt crystals or slippery frost. The scraping made a rhythmic sound, soft, steady, almost like brushing sand. It was a task that required little thought, allowing the mind to rest even as the body worked. Many sailors found a strange peace in the daily ritual, pushing the stones back and forth in long, mindful strokes. Those not assigned to ropes or decks found themselves helping with repairs elsewhere. A ship at sea was a world in constant need of attention. Hinges needed tightening. Barrels needed retying. Sails developed small tears that had to be stitched before the wind worsened them. Lanterns were checked, refilled, and hung properly. And always, there was something to fix, some small part of the ship that needed care to ensure it would survive another day in the winter cold. Meals aboard the ship were simple, and preparing them was another quiet part of daily life. A small cooking area, often little more than a metal grate or a suspended pot, provided warm broth or stewed grains. On winter mornings, a pot of warm water was precious, allowing sailors to soften hard bread or warm their hands around the steaming rim of a tin cup. Salted fish, dried peas, chips, biscuit, and occasionally a pot of thick porridge made up the bulk of their diet. Perhaps it was not luxurious, but warm food had its own comfort, especially when eaten while wrapped in coarse wool and standing near the small warmth of the cooking area. The cook moved slowly and patiently, stirring pots with deliberate motions, always aware that a single mistake, a spilled pot, or a stray ember could be dangerous aboard a wooden ship. As the day progressed, the sailors shifted into more demanding tasks. Hoisting sails required group effort. A chorus of heave hosea echoed softly across the deck as the men pulled in unison, using their combined strength to raise heavy canvas into the wind. In winter, the sails often stiffened, making them slower to lift and more stubborn to tie. Fingers turned numb, knots became more difficult, and breath came in pale clouds. Yet the work continued at a steady pace, driven not by urgency but by necessity. The physical exhaustion of daily life shaped every night that followed. Each task scrubbing, lifting, sewing, hauling wore on the muscles. By the time the sun dipped low toward the horizon, the men felt the weight of the day in their arms, backs, and legs. Their movements slowed, not from laziness but from the body's quiet plea for rest. Still, there was beauty woven into the day's labor. Moments when the sea shimmered under midday light. Moments when a sailor paused to drink cool water and listened to the wind weaving through the rigging. Moments when laughter broke out soft, tired, but sincere after a shared joke or a remembered tale. Even pirates, hardened by sea life, found comfort in small things. As afternoon blended into dusk, the crew prepared the ship for the coming night. Ropes were tied off. Tools were stored away. Barrels were secured so they would not roll with the night swaying. A final check of the sails ensured they would hold steady until morning light. The deck grew quieter as tasks finished one by one, replaced by the soft conversations of men rubbing warmth back into their hands or tightening their cloaks against the returning cold. The winter sky shifted slowly into hues of deep blue, the last traces of daylight fading into the horizon. The lanterns were lit, their gentle glow returning warmth to the ship's wooden bones. And as night settled, the men descended below deck, worn but satisfied by the steady rhythm of their day. Their exhaustion was not a curse, it was a blessing, a gift. It allowed them to sleep through the cold, to rest deeply despite the wind outside. Every knot tied, every rope repaired, every deck scrubbed added to that weariness, and in that weariness, they found the peace that would cradle them through the long, frozen night. The ship creaked gently as though sighing in sympathy with its tired crew. Above, the stars began to appear once more, watching quietly as the sailors drifted into the warm embrace of sleep. And so, life aboard a medieval pirate ship, though harsh, though cold, though filled with endless tasks, carried its own stillness, its own quiet rhythm, its own kind of solace. As the pale winter sun drifted slowly toward the horizon, the pirate ship entered one of the most delicate rituals of its long day. The settling of the vessel for nightfall. It was a time of quiet transition, when the steady rhythm of work softened, and the final tasks of the day unfolded with a kind of practiced grace. The men aboard, weary from their hours in the cold, knew that the night demanded its own form of readiness. Far out at sea, dusk arrived differently than on land. There were no trees or hills to cast shadows first. No village chimneys beginning to smoke. Instead, the sky gradually deepened in color, shifting from bright blue to muted silver, then into gentle shades of lavender and soft gray. The sea reflected these colors like a vast, rippling mirror, and the ship, floating atop the changing light, seemed almost suspended between worlds, one fading, the other growing. The crew, knowing the night's approach by instinct as much as by sight, moved with unhurried precision. Though tired, they worked with a calm that came from habit and necessity. Night at sea was peaceful, yes, but it was also a time when the ocean became unknowable, and every detail, every rope, every sail, every tool needed to be properly set. The first task was securing the sails. The wind weakened as evening approached, but a sudden gust could always rise without warning. A handful of sailors made their way to the masts, their boots tapping softly on the wooden deck. They worked methodically, lowering the sails just enough to ensure the ship wouldn't race unattended through the night. The canvas, stiff from winter air, folded into heavy rippling layers as they guided it down. The sound of the canvas settling was a soothing one, a soft, slow rustling, like an enormous blanket being gathered. Ropes slithered through calloused hands, tied carefully around cleats polished by years of use. Knots were checked twice, not out of fear, but out of the steady, thoughtful caution that the sea always demanded. Nearby, other sailors stowed the supplies that had been used during the day. The barrels that held food, water, and tools were pushed into their proper corners, secured with ropes to keep them from shifting during the night as a gentle sway. Nets were folded neatly. Buckets were emptied of seawater from cleaning tasks and hung upside down to dry. Even small items, wooden bowls, scrapers, scraps of cloth were tucked away in their assigned places. Keeping the deck orderly was more than discipline. It was safety. A coil of rope left loose, or a tool rolling freely, could trip a man in the darkness, and the sea offered no forgiveness for careless mistakes. So the crew moved with soft murmurs and steady hands, ensuring that every object found its resting place before the sun disappeared fully. As day warcade, the sky dimmed further. The first evening star flickered weakly, then sharpened into focus, its pale gleam dancing above the masts. One by one, other stars appeared until the heavens resembled a vast, quiet tapestry stitched with points of silver light. In this growing twilight, the rigging received its final check. Sailors climbed the rope ladders with the confidence of men who had done so 1,000 times. They inspected knots, tightened loose lines, and made sure no thread of rope had weakened under the day's strain. Up there, high above the deck, they felt the wind more keenly, brushing against their wool coats and stirring their hair. The rigging hummed gently with the shifting air, creating a soft chorus of taut strings vibrating together. From below, the silhouettes of the men in the rigging looked like dark figures against the fading sky. The others watched briefly, admiring the quiet skill required to move gracefully among the ropes. There was no shouting, no rishanli, the gentle creak of the masts, and the occasional low call of a sailor checking in with the crew below. Once the rigging was secured, the men descended carefully. Their boots touched the deck with soft thuds, and for a moment, the only sound was the ocean's slow-breathing waves rising and falling, brushing the ship with a lazy rhythm. Now came the lighting of the lanterns. As darkness thickened, the watchmen and a few deckhands lifted the glass lanterns from their hooks below deck. Each lantern held a small, flickering flame, protected from the wind by clear panes and iron frames. One by one, these lanterns were hung along the deck's main walkway, casting warm circles of golden light across the planks. The glow softened the edges of the ship's shadows. It illuminated ropes in gentle amber, highlighted the curves of barrels, and made the worn grain of the deck look almost polished. The lanterns swayed slightly with the ship's movement, their light trembling but never going out. With the deck prepared and the last of the daylight slipping below the horizon, the crew allowed themselves a rare moment of stillness. Some leaned quietly against the rail, looking out at the darkening water. Others stretched their arms, letting muscles unwind after a long day's strain. The wind, though cold, no longer felt harsh. It carried a slow serenity, as if the sea itself were preparing to rest. The ship seemed to sense the approach of night as well. Its creaks softened, its movements gentled, and the sounds within its wooden frame settled into a steady lull. Even the waves, lapping against its sides, grew calmer, as though the ocean were easing into the quiet hours along with the crew. As the last tasks finished, the watchman for the first night shift stepped forward. He adjusted his heavy wool coat, tested the strength of his boots, and fastened the strap of the lantern he would carry along the deck. His duty was to keep an eye on the sea and the sky, to listen for the slightest change in the wind, and to ensure that the rest of the crew slept safely. The others, relieved of responsibility for the night, slowly made their way toward the lower deck, where warmth and rest awaited. Their movements were calm, unhurried. The physical exhaustion from the day softened every step, smoothed every thought, and quieted every voice. The descent into the dimly lit belly of the ship felt like entering a sheltered world, protected from the vast cold watching outside. Above them, the lanterns glowed like small stars of their own, steady, warm, and patient. The sails rested. The ropes lay taut and quiet. The supplies were safely stowed, and the ship, having completed its evening ritual, settled into the embrace of the winter night. Here, on this genty sea, under a blanket of starlight, the pirates' day ended not with commotion, but with calm. With order, with a slow exhale, as the vessel prepared to rock its weary crew into sleep. And so, as darkness wrapped itself around the ship, nightfall settled with a sense of peace, quiet, steady, and deeply earned. The descent into the belly of a medieval pirate ship was never a grand affair. There were no carved stairwells, nor polished rails, only a narrow opening in the deck, framed by weather-beaten planks and dim ropes, sagging from years of salt and sun. Yet, for the weary sailor, this simple hatch was an unmistakable beacon of rest. It whispered of shelter, of warmth, of a world quieter than the endless winds above. And as the crew of our winter-worn vessel made their way down after a long day at sea, they stepped not into grandeur, but into the humble, beating heart of their floating home. Below deck, the air felt different, thicker, warmer, infused with the familiar scents of oiled wood, damp wool, and the faint musk of humans who worked harder than they ever slept. A single lantern flickered near the beams, its flame trembling gently with every shift of the ship. Its glow cast long, liquid shadows across the curved ribs of the hull, illuminating the space in soft, wavering gold. Every creak of timber, every low murmur of the sea against the outer planks, every muted footstep blended into a cradle of quiet sound, soothing in its constancy. This was the sleeping quarter, not a grand cabin or a spacious room, but an elongated hollow carved between beams and cargo space. Wooden supports crossed overhead like the rafters of a simple barn, and sailors had learned over generations to make the most of every inch. Along both sides of the hull hung rows of hammocks, slung from hooks hammered into the beams. Some swayed lazily in the stillness, while others hung taut and motionless, as though waiting for the next exhausted body to sink into them. The hammocks themselves were simple things, strips of sturdy canvas or weather-softened cloth, the edges reinforced by rope bindings. They were stretched between 2 points, forming gentle arcs that rose and dipped with the rolling of the sea. These were no luxurious beds, yet they offered what the cold deck never could, the ability to sway with the ship rather than against it. And so, while the wind howled outside and waves slapped angrily against the boards, these hammocks rocked their occupants in slow, calming rhythm, like cradles for grown men hardened by the sea. Some pirates preferred their hammocks high near the beams where the warmest air gathered. Others, seeking a little more privacy, slung theirs lower, close to the crates and barrels stacked neatly at the bottom of the hold. These barrels filled with flour, salted fish, dried peas, water, and sometimes cheap wine helped insulate the sleeping quarters. They formed small walls and divisions, creating pockets of space where lantern glow softened and shadows pooled gently. The pirates' personal belongings were few but precious. A weathered cloak draped over a hook, a small wooden carving tied to a hammock rope, a dented tin cup tucked beside a sleeping mat. Each item told a quiet story, a memory from a distant shore, a gift from a stranger, a lucky charm carried through years of storms and skirmishes. These were the traces of humanity hidden behind the fearsome reputation outsiders imagined. As more crew members descended the ladder, the room hummed with low, contented sounds. A cough here, a yawn there, the brief scrape of boots before being set aside. No one spoke loudly. Voices stayed soft out of respect for those already drifting into sleep, and out of an unspoken reverence for the peaceful haven the space provided. Even pirates understood, perhaps better than most, that rest was sacred. The lantern's glow warmed the room, but the deeper warmth came from bodies and breath. On a winter night at sea, temperatures outside could drop enough to freeze ropes stiff and turn spilled water brittle as glass. But below deck, enclosed by thick wooden walls and the natural insulation of cargo, the cold softened. The air gathered and held warmth like a shared blanket, spreading it from one hammock to the next. A few sailors, those who couldn't bear hammocks, or those who simply preferred solid ground beneath them, even when at sea, laid their woolen bedrolls across wooden planks between barrels. Here they created makeshift sleeping nest bundles of cloth, sail scraps, and the occasional animal skin tucked into corners. Though less comfortable during rough seas, these nests offered a sense of stillness that hammocks could not, a firm reassurance to those whose minds found rest only when they felt anchored. The flickering lantern light caressed each surface it touched to ropes. The curved beams, the smooth swell of the hammock sand, created a dreamlike atmosphere. Shadows swayed gently across the walls like drifting waves, as though the sea itself had seeped inside to keep the sailors company. The entire space breathed in slow, rhythmic motions, rising and falling with the ship as a steady roll. And in those quiet, lulling moments, the pirates felt the day's exhaustion melt gradually from their limbs. Some men murmured quietly to one another, sharing stories or soft laughter. A few whispered prayers, asking for calmer winds the next day, or silently thanking the sea for another night of peace. Others drifted off without a word, their breathing settling into soft, steady patterns that joined the continuous low symphony of the ship's interior. Every pirate understood that, while the deck above held danger winds, storms and amidst the space below offered refuge. Here, in the sheltered belly of the ship, they could remain hidden from the spray of the cold sea and the bite of the winter air. Here, no matter how harsh the world outside became, they found a slice of warmth and quiet carved out in wood and cloth. And so, one by one, the sailors surrendered to sleep. Some curled into tight bundles beneath thick wool blankets, while others let their hammocks sway them gently. A few shifted positions, seeking a warmer corner or adjusting their cloak. The sounds of settling bodies blended with the ship's creaks, forming a lullaby older than any song. Soon, the space fell into peaceful stillness. The lantern burned low, the shadows softened, and the lost murmurs faded into silence. Only the rhythmic breathing of the crew remained, along with the gentle sway of hammocks rocking in unison with the pulse of the sea. In this quiet, warm, flickering chamber of wood and canvas, medieval pirates found the one thing the sea rarely offered freely: deep, much-needed rest. And though the world above froze and the winds howled across the dark waters, down here, below the deck, the sailors slept safe in the sheltering cradle of their humble ship. There was a certain art to sleeping at sea, a quiet craft shaped not by comfort but by necessity, persistence, and the simple desire to close one's eyes without being flung across the deck by an ill-timed wave. Medieval pirates, those rugged wanderers of wind and wave, knew this art better than most. And nowhere was their ingenuity more visible than in the small, humble ways they built their sleeping spaces. Hammocks gently swaying in the lantern glow, woolen bedrolls tucked into corners, and makeshift nests fashioned from sailcloth and scraps. In these simple arrangements lay the secret to their survival, warmth, and precious moments of rest. The hammock was the most common refuge, though many who have never set foot on a ship often imagine them as flimsy or precarious things. In truth, aboard a pirate vessel, the hammock was a faithful companion, one that could cradle an exhausted sailor even in the roughest seas. Made from sturdy canvas or softened cloth, it was suspended between wooden beams by thick ropes, each knot tied with the practiced confidence of hands accustomed to rope work. A hammock did not simply hang. It breathed with the movement of the ship. When the vessel rose against a wave, the hammock lifted, following in gentle rhythm. When the ship dipped or swayed, the hammock answered with a slow drift of its own, moving like a pendulum guided by the deep pulse of the ocean. For a sailor, lying within its curved embrace, the sensation could feel soothing, like being rocked by invisible tides into a slow, dreamlike state. To lie in a hammock required a bit of skill. The sailor had to settle his weight evenly, letting his back rest deep in the cloth so he would not tip out during the night. A blanket or cloak was pulled over the body, tucking the edges beneath the legs or along the sides to keep drafts away. Some tied small pouches or keepsakes to the ropes above, letting them dangle overhead like silent guardians. And once inside, once the lantern light dimmed and the murmurs of the crew softened into stillness, the hammock became a warm, secluded crate afloat in the darkness, swaying ever so gently. Yet, not every pirate chose the hammock. Some simply preferred the reassuring solidity of the ship's planks beneath them. For these men, wool bedrolls provided a simpler, earthier refuge, spread across the floor, often between barrels or beneath low beams. These bedrolls were thick, tightly woven, and a bit scratchy but warm. They held heat better than loose blankets, especially when folded twice or layered with spare clothing. A bedroll and the planks did not rock with the ship. Instead, the ship's movements pressed softly through it, reminding its occupant of the world just beyond the wooden boards. Many pirates found this sensation committee a quiet reminder that they were still connected to something solid amid the ever-moving sea. And though the occasional wave might send a faint shudder through the hull, the bedroll remained steady, a grounded island in a world of shifting water. Some sailors enhanced their bedrolls with whatever they could find. Scraps of old sailcloth folded beneath for extra warmth, a bundle of rope as a makeshift pillow, or a cloak rolled tightly under the neck. Crates and barrels became walls, shielding sleepers from cold drafts or stray footsteps. Each sleeping area, tug simple, reflected the small, personal touches of the one who made it a hint of individuality in an otherwise communal world. Then there were the makeshift nests, those curious little havens crafted by necessity, creativity, or preference, when supplies were plentiful or the weather particularly harsh. Some pirates stitched or tied old pieces of sailcloth into loose sleeping sacks. These sacks, though not tailored, wrapped snugly around the body, keeping warmth close and cold air out. Sailcloth was surprisingly effective at shielding against drafts, and once softened by years of use, it formed a cocoon that felt almost like a shelter within a shelter. Others built nests using whatever materials were available: folded tarps, spare ropes, bits of fur stolen from merchants, unused canvas, or layers of discarded cloth. These nests often gathered near the ship's sides, where the hull curved inward, forming natural pockets of protected space. Here the lantern's glow softened, shadows pooled like blankets, and the sounds of the sea pressed gently through the planks. A sailor resting in such a nest could listen to the rhythmic tap of waves against wood, the soft hum of the ship's timbers, and the distant, soothing lull of wind threading through the rigging. Even in the worst cold, these improvised beds offered refuge. A sack of sailcloth trapped warmth around the body. A nest of layered cloth muffled the bite of the winter air. A bedroll, though plain, held heat close to the floor, and a hammock, gently rocking, kept its occupant away from cold planks entirely. Each solution tag modeste reflected the timeless truth of seafaring life. Comfort was not found in luxuries, but in resource. As the night deepened, the sleeping quarters below deck settled into its familiar rhythm. Hammocks swung gently like pendulums, casting slow-moving shadows across the beams. The soft rustle of cloth and quiet sighs of resting sailors blended with the low breath of the sea pressing against the hull. Bedrolls lay still, their occupants curled into warm bundles. In the dim corners, makeshift nests rose like small mounds, shaped by hands seeking warmth and peace. The ship itself joined in the lullaby. Its timbers creaked softly, stretching like an old creature settling into sleep. The ropes quivered gently overhead. The ocean whispered along the hull, a soft, endless murmur. Together, ship and sea created a rhythm slow, heavy, calming a rhythm that made even the coldest winter nights feel gentle. And so, in hammocks swaying like moonlit cradles, on bedrolls softened by use, and within nests of cloth stitched together by necessity, medieval pirates found their rest. Crude by the standards of land dwellers, perhaps, but precious beyond words to those who lived at the mercy of wind and wave. These simple beds carried them through nights of frost, storms, and endless crossings of the wide, whispering sea. For in the end, it was not luxury that kept them warm, it was the ship itself, their companions near them, and the soft, steady rhythm of a world always in motion. Warmth, aboard a medieval pirate ship sailing through winter seas, was not a luxury, but a precious and carefully guarded treasure. It was earned through layers, sared breadth, clever materials, and the steady companionship of a wooden hull determined to protect its crew from the freezing bite of the open ocean. Night after night, as cold winds swept across the deck and icy sprays settled on ropes and rails, the pirates below found ways simple, practical, and time-tested to keep themselves from shivering through the long darkness. The first defense against the cold was always clothing, for sailors did not dress for appearance, but for survival. Wool was the seafarer's greatest ally. Thick, coarse, and surprisingly warm even when damp, wool trapped heat close to the body. Every pirate carried at least one woolen layer, sometimes a shirt, sometimes leggings, sometimes both. These clothes absorbed the day's chill, but kept precious warmth from escaping, forming a barrier between the sailor and the unforgiving sea air. Over wool came heavier garments, cloaks, sea coats, and sometimes tattered capes that had traveled from shore to shore. A cloak was more than a simple garment. It was a shield against the elements. Pirates wrapped them tightly across their chests, pulling the edges beneath their bodies when they lay down, creating pockets of warmth that slowly expanded as their bodies relaxed into sleep. Seacoats, often made from thick, treated cloth, offered even better protection. They were worn and weather-beaten, bearing the marks of salt spray and storm winds. Yet they remained sturdy companions for freezing nights. Some sailors kept special garments for nighttime, pieces of cloth, or layers stitched together from scraps of old sails, shaped into loose-fitting jackets or pullovers. These makeshift clothes were not elegant, but they held heat well and did not need to be dry to be effective. A pirate slipping into such garments before settling down for sleep might feel the cold retreat just enough to make rest possible. Then came blankets. Worn, patched, and sometimes frayed at the edges. They varied from one sailor to another, some inherited from home, others acquired from looted ships, and still others sewn from pieces of old fabric. A good blanket was cherished like a rare treasure. Pirates draped them over their hammocks, wrapped themselves tightly, and tucked the edges beneath their legs or arms, sealing in warmth. When several men slept near one another, blankets sometimes overlapped, forming small pockets of shared heat. Furs, though less common, were prized for harsh winters. A strip of fox, a lining of rabbit, or a patch of sheepskin added luxurious warmth to the otherwise coarse bedding. When a pirate possessed fur, he often used it as a top layer, letting the soft material rest against his chest or neck, where warmth escaped most easily. Even a small fur piece could make a cold night bearable, especially when combined with layers beneath. And then there were the oilskin thick, treated cloths coated in oil or tar to repel water. Though far from soft, these served a special purpose. When winds grew fierce and temperatures dropped sharply, oilskins could block the draft. Sailors draped them over hammocks like makeshift roofs, or placed them on the outer edges of bedrolls, keeping moisture out and warmth in. The smell of tar clung to them, mingling with the scent of the ship's timber, becoming part of the sensory world the pirates knew intimately. But despite all these materials, the greatest warmth in the sleeping quarters came not from clothing or blankets, but from the sailors themselves. In the cramped space below deck, every breath, every body, every shared moment contributed to a slowly building heat. It began subtly as the first few men settled into their hammocks or bed. At first, the cold lingered, pressing against wool and cloth like an unwelcome guest. Yet as more crew members entered, the enclosed space thickened with warmth, human warmth that filled the room gradually, pushing the chill aside. Within an hour, the sleeping quarters transformed. The lantern light deepened into a warmer hue. Shadows softened, no longer edged with the sharpness of cold. The air no longer pricked at exposed skin, but settled softly over the room in a peaceful, enveloping calm. Hammocks swayed with a little more ease, their occupants breathing deeply, their bodies radiating heat into the space around them. Bedrolls became small islands of comfort, warmed from within. The makeshift nests felt snug, their cloth layers holding onto every degree of warmth gifted by the bodies inside. Sometimes, especially on the coldest nights, pirates shared warmth intentionally. The hammocks hung close enough that the occupants' blankets touched, allowing heat to flow more easily. Sailors sleeping on the planks placed their bedrolls near one another, careful not to disturb but grateful for the presence of warmth nearby. Quiet companionship replaced bravado in those hours. Nobody mocked another for seeking warmth, not when survival depended on it. Occasionally, someone stirred in the night, adjusting layers, pulling a cloak tighter, or shifting to find a warmer spot. The sound was soft, scarcely more than a rustle in the dark, blending with the gentle creak of the ship's beams. The wooden hull, warmed by the body heat of dozens of men, exhaled its own faint warmth back into the room, creating a cocoon-like effect. It felt as though the ship itself offered comfort, sheltering its crew as it cut through the cold winter sea. And above all of this, wrapping around clothing, blankets and bodies alike, was the rhythmic sway of the vessel. As the ship moved, warmth gathered beneath the layers, settling deeper with each slow rise and fall. The motion itself seemed to encourage rest, as though the ocean rocked the crew tenderly, its waves whispering through the wood, its pulse syncing with their breaths. In these quiet, dimly lit chambers, warmth was not simply about surviving. The coldit was about finding peace in a world ruled by wind, waves, and uncertainty. It was a reminder that comfort, even in the harshest conditions, could be created with humble materials, resourceful hands, and the shared presence of those who lived and worked together beneath a single wooden roof. And so, wrapped in wool, cloaks, and the soft glow of communal warmth. The pirates slept deeply, quietly, and gratefully until the first distant hint of dawn touched the sea once more. Even on the coldest nights when winter winds swept across the deck and the sea carried a biting chill, there was one ritual aboard the pirate ship that softened to the day's harshness: the quiet gathering for food and warmth before sleep. It was a simple tradition, born not of luxury but of necessity, yet it carried a comfort so deep that even the roughest sailor felt the day ease from his bones as evening settled in. As the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched long across the deck, the ship transformed. The cries of gulls faded, replaced by the low hum of the sea. The crew, weary from hours of labor, drifted toward the small cooking area near the middle of the ship, a modest space with a metal pot, a wooden ladle, and a fire carefully shielded from the wind. Even on vessels not meant for elegance or delicacy, this humble corner took on the role of a hearth, glowing faintly against the encroaching cold. The night's meal was never extravagant. Pirates rarely enjoyed feasts while at sea, but what they had, they prepared with quiet gratitude. Often, it began with a pot of warm, brotha-thin, savory liquid made from dried peas, salted meat, onions when they were lucky, or bones simmered slowly throughout the day. Tog simple, this steaming broth, was a treasure during winter voyage. It warmed the hands first, then the chest, then the deep core of the body where fatigue lingered. As the pot simmered and released gentle wisps of fragrant steam, the crew gathered around in small groups. They passed wooden bowls from hand to hand, each man waiting patiently for his turn. The ladle dipped slowly, the broth pouring in warm, steady streams that softened stiff fingers. Simply by being held, no one rushed this moment. The world beyond the ship might demand quick decisions and swift action. But here, at this quiet hour, time stretched and gentleness prevailed. The first taste was always a relief. The warmth spread from tongue to throat, traveling across chilled ribs and into the weary stomach. Pirates closed their eyes, letting the heat settle deep inside them. Some sighed softly without realizing it, the sound blending with the soft crackle of the shielded fire. For a few precious minutes, the cold outside seemed to disappear, replaced by the glow of shared nourishment. Alongside the broth came simple meals: hardtack, soft and warm liquid, small cuts of salted fish, bits of dried fruit or cheese saved for such nights, and occasionally a piece of ship-s biscuit warmed slightly over the fire until it lost its stiffness. It was hardly the food of kings, but out here, beneath a winter sky, these humble dishes felt generous and comforting. Some sailors preferred to eat slowly, savoring each bite as though stretching the warmth from the food into the quiet future of the night. Others finished quickly, eager to hold their bowl longer for its heat than for its contents. A few dipped pieces of bread or biscuit into the broth, letting them soak until soft enough to be swallowed. The rhythmic slurping and the soft clink of wooden bowls formed a peaceful chorus that drifted through the air like a lullaby. For drink, the pirates turned to warm liquids whenever they could: hot water flavored with herbs if supplies allowed, or a weak grog warmed gently, not for intoxication but for the comfort of heat. When the pot was heated, its steam curled upward, fogging the cool night air, carrying scents reminiscent of faraway ports and fleeting warmth. One of the most cherished practices was warming the hands. Pirates would wrap their fingers around their bowls, squeezing gently, letting the warmth soak into calloused palms and stiff joints. The warmth eased the ache of rope work and long hours, loosening muscles that had tightened in the cold. Sometimes, they held the bowls against their cheeks or pressed the sides of their chests for a moment, savoring every bit of heat the evening offered. These small rituals simply bound the crew together. The conversations were quiet, sometimes no more than murmurs or soft chuckles. No grand stories were needed at this hour. Instead, the men shared small observations, gentle humor, or memories spoken in low, soothing tones. The fire's glow played across their tired faces, softening their expressions, making even the roughest sailor appear peaceful and calm. Once the meal ended, the pirates cleaned their bowls with scraps of cloth or a bit of seawater, preparing them for the next night's use. Some stayed near the fire a few moments longer, warming their legs or drying damp sleeves. Others stretched their backs, feeling the last remnants of the evening. As warmth settled into their bones before descending below deck to their hammocks or bed. But the warmth of these evening rituals did not remain solely on their skin. Followed them into the sleeping quarters. As each sailor made his way below deck, the lingering heat from the meal helped fend off the initial chill that awaited them. The warmth spread through their limbs, making blankets feel softer, hammocks more inviting, and the dim lantern glow a little richer. In the confined, protected space beneath the deck, this warmth became part of the collective energy of the room. Breaths released small clouds of leftover heat, and full bellies radiated comfort beneath wool layers. The meal had not only nourished their bodies, it had calmed their minds, settled their spirits, and prepared them for the gentle surrender of sleep. Even on the frostest nights, when cold seeped through the boards and winter winds rattled the rigging overhead, the pirates were not entirely at the mercy of the elements. They carried warmth with them in their clothes, in their blankets, in the lingering glow of broth still warming their cores, and in the quiet companionship they shared around a simple pot of food. These small, dependable pleasures created a buffer against the harshness of the sea, reminding them that even in a world of storms and uncertainties, comfort could still be found in the humblest of rituals. And so, after the last bowl was emptied and the final warming breath exhaled, the crew drifted toward, restful, warm, and at peace, ready to be rocked into slumber by the steady rhythm of the sleeping ship. As the crew settled into their hammocks, bedrolls, and makeshift nests, the ship below deck soft into a gentle stillness. The flickering lanterns cast long shadows across the wooden beams, and the faint scent of wool, sailcloth, and warm broth lingered in the enclosed quarters. Yet while most of the pirates surrendered to sleep, a few remained awake, taking their place upon the deck as night watch. This quiet duty, though essential for safety, carried a rhythm all its own, a slow, reflective peace shared only with the stars and the rolling ocean. The night watch began quietly, with no fanfare or urgency. One or two sailors rose from their hammocks, careful not to disturb their slumbering companions. They moved with practiced softness, boots muffled by woolen wraps, hands steady as they adjusted cloaks and checked lanterns. Every movement was deliberate, almost ritualistic, designed to protect both themselves and the sleepers below. The ship, too, seemed to understand, settling into the gentle sway of calm night motion as if easing its burden onto the watchful shoulders of a few. Above deck, the cold air wrapped around them, sharper than the warmth they had left below. The winter wind brushed against faces and hands, carrying the scent of salt and the faint musk of timber. Yet, despite the chill, there was serenity in the moment. The vast darkness of the open sea stretched in all directions, calm and patient. Waves lapped against the hull with a steady, hypnotic rhythm, their soft pulses echoing through the planks and into the hearts of those who walked the quiet deck. The night was clear, and the stars shone with a serene brilliance. Sailors, accustomed to the vastness of the sky, often paused to take in the constellations above. The stars guided their thoughts, tracing familiar patterns that spoke of distant lands, storms weathered, and voyages yet to come. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a faint river of light, mirrored subtly in the rippling reflection of the sea. In these quiet hours, the cosmos felt intimate. One could almost reach out and touch the distant points of light, while the ship floated like a cradle beneath them. As they walked, the sailors' steps were careful and soft. They moved along the deck in silence, boots barely disturbing the timber beneath. Occasionally, one hand would brush the railing, steadying against the gentle sway of the vessel. Each motion was slow, deliberate, almost meditative. Their minds, free from the day's labor, could wander to distant memories, quiet dreams, or simply the hypnotic dance of waves beneath them. The world seemed to slow, stretching the night into a space that could hold peace indefinitely. The lanterns above deck glowed faintly, their light casting warm circles on the planks. The sway of the ship made these halos move in gentle arcs, a soft, rhythmic pulse that complemented the rolling of the ocean. Shadows stretched and curved, merging with the darkness in a way that made the deck feel both intimate and vast at once. Every rope, sail, and barrel became part of a quiet choreography of light and motion, observed only by the solitary watchman or the occasional partner sharing the path. The sound of the ocean was constant, yet never intrusive. Waves whispered against the hull, rising and falling in a timeless cadence. The occasional splash or hiss of spray carried a muted echo, blending seamlessly with the creak of timbers and the soft swish of sails above. It was a lullaby for those awake, a reminder that the world continued gently beyond the boundaries of human labor. Each step on the deck aligned with this rhythm, creating a subtle harmony between man and sea. The watch was more than vigilance. It was a moment of reflection, a space where a pirate could be alone with thought, without fear or interruption. One could trace the silhouette of the ship's mast against the night sky, watch the quiet undulations of a distant wave, or listen to the hushed breathing of the crew below. Even the cold became part of the meditation, sharpening senses and reminding the watchman of the fragility and beauty of the vessel floating on a vast, open world. Sometimes, companions shared the patrol. Two pirates would walk side by side, exchanging whispers too soft for the sleeping quarters to hear. They spoke of the day, of ships seen in the distance, or of the comfort that awaited them in their hammocks after the night watch ended. The words were slow, calm, measured, never hurried, carrying the warmth of human connection into the otherwise vast and silent night. And when conversation paused, the two walked in quiet companionship, letting the rhythm of waves and sway of the ship speak for them. The gentle night watch was also a guardian of stillness. Lanterns swayed but did not go out. Ropes and sails shifted only as the wind required, guided by the hands of those who knew their duties well. Even the smallest detail, a misaligned line or a rolling barrel, was corrected with a soft touch, maintaining the equilibrium of the ship so the sleeping crew below could remain undisturbed. Ibidi action, though minimal, became part of a careful balance, merging protection with serenity. Above all, the night watch reminded the pirates of the subtle beauty of life at sea. There was comfort in simplicity. The sound of waves, the cool whisper of wind, the steady sway beneath one's feet. The quiet allowed the mind to wander gently, unpressured by tasks or danger. A star streaking across the sky, the shimmer of moonlight on a cresting wave, or the faint creak of a rope in the wind became moments of quiet, wonder-tiny meditations that carried the watcher into calm reflection. And as the hours passed, the first faint glimmers of dawn began to soften the edges of night. The stars slowly dimmed, the waves shimmered in new light, and the horizon hinted at the return of the sun. The night watch concluded, and those who had walked in silence could return below deck, their steps now heavier with the promise of warmth and rest. The ship, having been quietly tended, would continue to rock, gently, carrying sleeping sailors into the remaining hours of the night with calm, unbroken rhythm. In this way, the gentle night watch was not a duty born only. A vigilance it was a quiet interlude, a moment of harmony between sailor and sea, between stillness and motion. Beneath the stars and upon the rolling waves, pirates found peace in their vigilance, comfort in their solitude, and calm in the ceaseless, hypnotic rhythm of the ocean. Below deck, the ship had fallen into a gentle, unbroken rhythm. Lanterns flickered softly, casting slow-moving shadows across the hammocks and bedrolls. The wind outside whispered over the rigging, carrying the faint taste of salt and the faint promise of distant lands. And within this cradle of wood, canvas, and quiet warmth, the pirates slept, drifting, swaying, and surrendering themselves to the realm of dreams. Dreams aboard a ship at sea were unlike those that visited land-bound sleepers. They were shaped by the motion of the vessel, the soft sway beneath the body, and the constant, rolling pulse of waves against the hull. For the sailors, sleep was not a static state, but a continuation of the sea, gentle dance between consciousness and the subconscious, where imagination flowed as freely as the ocean currents. Some dreams carried memories, fragments of places long left behind. A sailor might see the rolling hills of his childhood village, fields bathed in sunlight, and narrow lanes he had once wandered without care. Faces of friends, family, or lovers appeared, smiling faintly or speaking in whispers he could barely hear. Each memory was softened by time and distance, as if the sea itself had lent its gentle smoothing to the edges of the past. Others dreamed of the ship itself, its creaking beams, taut ropes, and swaying hammocks transformed in the mind's eye into calm landscapes of movement. A hammock became a quiet cradle drifting along golden currents. A coil of rope, became a river winding through the darkness. A lantern's glow became a small, serene sun floating amidst the shadows. Even the smell of tar and salt, the very essence of a pirate's life, wove itself seamlessly into these dreams, grounding the imagination in the familiar comfort of the ship. Sometimes, dreams carried whispers of the sea beyond what eyes could see. A wave, imagined taller than any storm encountered, would rise with gentle majesty, curling over a horizon made of silver light. A distant shore, imagined or remembered, would appear and vanish, leaving only the sound of waves and wind echoing in the mind. Sailors floated between these visions, weightless yet grounded, cradled in the rhythm of the vessel beneath them. Other dreams were quiet and meditative, almost like the slow pulse of the sea itself. A sailor might see the stars stretching endlessly across a black sky, each one a point of calm light in the vast darkness. He might follow a trail of moonlight across rippling water, letting the gentle waves guide his thoughts until the edges of the world blurred and dissolved into softness. These dreams did not require action, danger, or adventure. They existed solely to carry the mind into a state of calm, of slow breathing, and of gentle surrender. Even in the coldest winter nights, warmth from below deck seeped into the dreamer's senses. The woolen layers, blankets, and shared body heat became more than physical comfort. They became threads in the fabric of the dream itself. A sailor might imagine himself wrapped in an endless cloak of warmth, drifting above the waves, the ship below, the stars above, and the world compressed into a soft, secure cradle. Every sway of the hammock seemed mirrored in the mind, every creak of the wood reflected in the heartbeat of imagined currents. The rhythmic motion of the ship often guided the shape of dreams. When the vessel tilted gently to one side, a sailor might feel himself gliding through a golden forest, leaning with the trunks as though they were the masts and beams of the ship. When it rose and fell against a wave, he might drift along clouds that swelled and sank like liquid hills, floating higher and lower with the rolling rhythm of the ocean. Each dream was a slow meditation, shaped by movement, sound, and the infinite, quiet patterns of nature. Dreams also held fragments of the day, the laughter shared over a warm bowl of broth, the soft creak of rope under hands skilled in knots, the scent of tar and salt carried through the air, found their way into the mind's eye. A sailor might relive the gentle sway of a hammock or the simple satisfaction of a task completed, only to watch them expand and transform into landscapes where everything ordinary became magical in its serenity. Even moments of cold, which had pressed sharply against the skin hours before, were softened in the imagination, transmuted into gentle breezes that cooled rather than bit. In Tekiyat, the mind wove connections between memory, sensation, and imagination. One might dream of a lantern swinging softly above the deck, only to see it become a star in a distant sky. The smell of boiled grains or salted fish might bloom into imagined meadows of golden wheat or lush, rolling hills. Sounds of the ocean below, the whole soft and constant, became the rhythm of a distant river, or the lapping of waves against an imagined lakeshore. The line between reality and dream blurred, leaving only calm, gentle continuity. And in all of these visions, there was safety. The ship, the hammocks, the crew, and the watch above all combined to create a cocoon. Even the harsh winter wind outside was soft, slowed, and kept at bay. Dreams on the ship did not carry the terror of storms or the anxiety of solitudes. They were meditative, nurturing, and fluid. Every inhalation of warm air, every creak of the hull, every soft sway became part of a lullaby, unspoken yet fully felt. Thus, the pirates slept deeply. Their bodies rested, their hearts calmed, and their minds wandered through quiet landscapes that belonged only to them. The gentle sway of the ship carried them forward into an endless night, their thoughts drifting across imagined waters, through starry skies, past distant memories, and into the tender embrace of dreams. And as the night deepened, the lanterns below flickered more softly, the hammocks swayed in gentle rhythm, and the ocean outside whispered its slow, unceasing song. Each sailor remained cocooned in warmth, in rhythm, and in the quiet poetry of the sea, floating, dreaming, until the first light of dawn would someday touch the horizon once more. Here, amid the rolling tides and quiet creeks, the medieval pirate found not fear, not hardship, but the soft, meditative lull that could carry a man at last, into true, undisturbed rest. Not every night at sea was calm. Sometimes the wind would rise unexpectedly, skimming across the deck and rattling ropes against the masts. The waves might swell higher than usual, pressing against the ship with gentle persistence. The winter air, already sharp, could bite deeper, sending a chill through every layer of wool, sailcloth, and blanket. Yet even in such nights, there was a quiet, measured rhythm to how the medieval pirate crew managed. There was no panic, no frantic struggle, only practiced skill, teamwork, and the soft, steady heart of resilience. Below deck, the sleeping quarters felt colder first. Drafts seeped in through the seams between planks, and the sound of the waves rolling heavily against the hull became more insistent. The lanterns flickered in rhythm with the sway of the ship, casting moving shadows along hammocks and bedrolls. A chill settled over the space, nudging sailors awake. Yet there was calm in the familiarity of the ship's structure, and in the warmth of the crew nearby. The first measure of quiet comfort came from clothing. Sailors pulled layers, tighter woolen shirts beneath coats, cloaks wrapped snugly around shoulders, hoods drawn over heads, gloves and thick socks insulated hands and feet, while oilskins or extra sailcloth provided a windproof layer. Each adjustment was deliberate, done with care to preserve warmth without disturbing the sleeping companions around. The cold was acknowledged, respected, and quietly countered. Blankets and furs became central to comfort. Those in hammocks tucked them around their bodies, sometimes layering multiple pieces for added insulation. Sailors on planks or in makeshift nests pulled blankets from neighboring hammocks, sharing warmth without words. Heat from one body radiated into another, and in the small, enclosed space, the temperature slowly climbed, softened further by the gentle sway of the ship. Even the smallest touch a hand, brushing against a shoulder. A shared blanket corroborated to the collective warmth, forming an invisible network of care. Above deck, the crew adjusted sails and lines with calm precision. A strong wind might jostle the masts, yet each rope was tended by practiced hands. No shouting was necessary. A glance or a soft word of instruction carried authority. The sailors moved deliberately, checking knots, securing tarps, and adjusting hammocks or bedding if necessary. Their movements were methodical, a choreography developed over countless similar nights. The rhythm of work and the rhythm of waves intertwined, creating a subtle harmony rather than chaos. Even the heaviest of storms, when they approached slowly and the wind began to roar through the rigging, were met with this same calm efficiency. Some sailors reinforced hatches to keep drafts from below deck, while others ensured that supplies remained stowed and hammocks stayed secure. There was no fear in their actions, only the certainty that each small task mattered, and that together they could manage the night's challenges. The ship, sturdy and familiar, became a partner in this quiet endeavor, bending with the wind, rolling with the waves, and cradling the crew safely within. In these moments, the importance of shared experience was clear. A stronger sailor might adjust a neighboring hammock or share a blanket with someone whose fingers were stiff with cold. A quieter crew member might offer a nod or a word of encouragement to those on watch. Every act, however small, contributed to the resilience of the group. The pirates relied not only on their own preparation, but on the soft, cooperative rhythm that flowed naturally through the crew. Below deck, the gentle rocking of the ship played its own part in resilience. The sway that might have unsettled a novice sailor instead became a comforting lull, a continuous motion that reminded the crew of the ship's reliability. Even when the waves pressed more heavily against the hull, the movement was predictable and steady, almost like a slow, rolling cradle. Sleep returned for many, not in spite of the storm, but through it, guided by the gentle sway and shared warmth. Food and drink also offered reassurance on such nights. A small cup of warm broth or a sip of lightly heated grog provided not just physical warmth but mental comfort, a quiet ritual reminding the sailors that, despite the wind and cold, their basic needs were being met. Eating slowly, hands wrapped around the bowl, breath misting in the lantern glow, helped anchor the mind, keeping the chill at bay. Each sip, each bite, became part of a sequence of quiet, steady care preparation for rest, even as the world outside stirred. Even the watch above deck contributed to this calm. The few who remained vigilant did so with a meditative patience, stepping lightly on the planks, adjusting lines, and listening to the rhythm of wind and waves. Their soft, deliberate steps and occasional whispered instructions were part of a silent ballet, conducted in harmony with nature rather than against it. The ship moved as it always had, and the crew below could trust that these guardians ensured continuity, safety, and warmth. Through all of this, there was no drama. The storm was not a spectacle but a natural force, respected and accommodated. Cold was not an enemy but a companion, prompting care and attentiveness. The pirates' response was practical, calm, and communal. Every layer of clothing, every shared blanket, every lantern lit or rope tied was a quiet testament to preparation and resilience. And slowly, inevitably, the warmth returned. The air beneath deck thickened with heat. The crew's breath mingled with the subtle warmth radiating from wood and body, and the sway of the ship merged with the rhythm of comfort. By midnight or shortly thereafter, the worst of the cold or wind would pass, leaving the ship swaying gently once more. The crew cocooned in warmth and routine. In those hours, the pirates rested fully, wrapped in wool and blankets, soothed by the motion of the ship, and comforted by the quiet knowledge that together they could endure any night. Even in hardship, the rhythm of life aboard the medieval vessel remained steady, a calm assurance that warmth, safety, and rest could be found amidst wind, waves, and frost. In this way, storms and cold nights were never truly frightening. They were managed with soft hands, deliberate movements, shared warmth, and the unspoken trust among the crew. And when sleep returned, deep and restorative, it was richer and sweeter for having weathered the night together, held not only by blankets and clothing but by the calm, resilient pulse of a ship and its steadfast crew. As the first whispers of light crept slowly across the horizon, the world below deck began to shift. Dawn did not arrive with urgency or loud proclamation aboard a medieval pirate ship. It came gently, brushing the crests of waves with a pale, silvery glow and tinting the wooden planks with soft strokes of gold. Through narrow openings between planks and the edges of hatches, a faint brightness seeped into the sleeping quarters, stirring both light and warmth into the hush of night's retreat. The hammocks swayed softly in the early motion of the awakening ship. Bedrolls shifted slightly as the first stirring of life pressed against blankets. Makeshift nests, tucked into corners and layered with sailcloth or wool, began to yield to movement. The sailors, long accustomed to such gentle transitions, stretched quietly, muscles loosening after hours of rest in confined, swaying spaces. A hand reached for a cloak or blanket, adjusting it against the lingering coolness, while another rubbed sleep from eyes dulled by the night. Below deck, the air was infused with a mixture of warmth from sleeping bodies and the subtle crispness of early morning. Lanterns, no longer necessary in the pale light, had been extinguished hours before, leaving shadows to dissolve naturally as sunbeams crept in. The gentle sway of the ship continued to hum its soft rhythm, moving through timbers and into the bones of the crew. Even the faint murmur of the ocean, now catching the first hints of sunlight, seemed more melodic, more soothing, as if echoing the slow, inevitable promise of a new day. Stretching, yawning, and small sighs of comfort rose quietly. A sailor rolled from his hammock, taking care not to disturb the slumbering neighbor beside him. Another shook out a blanket, letting it fall neatly over a spare barrel for use later. The clatter of boots was still muted, softened by the early calm and the instinct to move gently within the shared space. There was no hurry here, just the patient unfolding of motion, the slow return to consciousness after the safe passage of night. Above deck, the light caught the frozen horizon, illuminating the edges of sails coated with frost, the ropes glinting with a fine layer of ice crystals. The wind had softened since midnight, leaving the ocean calm and reflective. Waves lapped with a gentle rhythm, mirroring the heartbeat of the vessel. The first watchmen, now concluding their duties, paused to take in the quiet beauty of the awakening world. Silver glow spreading across dark water, the faint shimmer of ice along the railings, the distant glint of a winter sun peeking over the horizon. The smell of the sea mingled with the warmth lingering below deck. It was sharper than at night, yet softened by the faint glow of dawn. Sailors pulled on their woolen layers once more, secured cloaks around shoulders, and prepared themselves for the day ahead. Even the simplest gesture, tightening a scarf, brushing frost from sleeves, straightening a rope or plank felt, infused with care and intention, a gentle acknowledgement of the endurance that had carried them through the night. Breakfast, though humble, began to emerge as a ritual of its own. Pots of warm water or broth, remnants of the night before, were stirred to life once again. Bread or ship-s biscuits were warmed or softened in a small fire or over the gentle heat of the hearth. Some sailors sipped slowly, hands cupping the bowl to preserve its warmth, while others shared bites or offered water to a companion. There was comfort not only in the food but in the shared quiet of these first morning moments. It was a reminder that survival, warmth, and community existed hand in hand, and that even the harshest night had been made bearable by cooperation and care. The crew moved gradually from sleep to wakefulness. Hammocks were untied, blankets folded, bedrolls stored or layered for warmth. Makeshift nests were dismantled carefully, and any stray items, cloaks, sails, or personal belongings were tidied with deliberate patience. Even the youngest sailor learned, by quiet observation, that morning aboard a pirate ship was as much about rhythm and calm endurance as it was about action. There was a poetry to the way the crew rose together, each motion echoing the steady pulse of the ship and the soft inevitability of sunlight breaking the frozen horizon. The warmth of human presence mingled with the soft glow of dawn, creating a space where both body and spirit felt renewed. The sailor might glance over at a neighbor, offering a faint smile or nod, acknowledging that the night's cold had been met with courage and shared care. The ship itself seemed to respond, creaking softly, timbers stretching and shifting as if to join in the quiet celebration of another day survived. Even the faintest sounds, the rustle of wool, the sway of a hammock being unhooked, the gentle murmur of waves contributed to a calm chorus of life. And as the crew emerged fully into the pale light, the reflection of their quiet endurance became clear. There was no boasting, no grand gestures, only a steady, deliberate preparation to face the day. The frozen horizon stretched ahead, vast and unbroken, yet it no longer intimidated. The sailors had rested. They had warmed themselves, shared comfort, and maintained the rhythm of life through night's cold and storms. Now, dawn allowed them to carry that quiet strength into the waking hours, their bodies and spirits aligned with the slow, enduring pulse of the sea. In the final moments before the day truly began, there was a reflective pause. A sailor might stand on the deck, shoulders relaxed, gazing at the glint of sun on water. He might feel the lingering warmth of blankets, the scent of wool and sailcloth, the memory of shared body heat, and the subtle music of the waves. Every element, the motion of the ship, the care of the crew, the rhythm of wind and water formed a gentle reminder of the endurance that defined life at sea. These were not heroic gestures of grandeur, but the quiet, persistent, patient acts of survival. It was in the layering of wool, the shared warmth of blankets, the deliberate steps on icy planks, the meditative attention of the night watch, and the soft unfolding of dawn that the medieval sailors' true resilience became visible. They had endured wind, cold, and isolation, yet had done so with calm, with cooperation, and with steady hearts. And so, as the first pale rays of sun reflected along the frozen horizon, the ship and its crew welcomed a new day, stretching, shaking off sleep, and inhaling the crisp morning air. They moved gently into their tasks, carrying with them the quiet strength and enduring patience of the night behind them. The hammocks, the bedrolls, and the makeshift nests had served their purpose. The crew had slept, warmed, dreamed, and survived. And now, with the world bathed in dawn, there was a soft, almost imperceptible celebration of life, quiet endurance, and the gentle rhythm of the sea that would carry them through yet another day. In this way, the story of a night aboard a medieval pirate ship closes not with drama, nor with fear, but with calm reflection, slow awakening, and the serene knowledge that these sailors, through their patience, their shared care, and their unspoken resilience had met the cold, the dark, and the vastness of the ocean with quiet dignity and enduring warmth. And so, our voyage through the quiet nights aboard a medieval pirate ship comes to an end. The hammocks are still, the bedrolls are warm, and the crew sleeps peacefully, cradled by the gentle sway of the sea. We have walked the decks, shared the warmth of blankets and cloaks, drifted through dreams, and witnessed the quiet resilience of those who endured cold winds, rolling waves, and long nights without complaint. Their strength was simple, steadfast, and sent a reminder that even in hardship, calm and comfort can be found. Now, as the last whispers of their world fade into the morning light, we leave the ship in its gentle rhythm, and as our spoken journey comes to a close, the soft, relaxing music will begin, carrying you further into peace, into rest, and into the slow embrace of sleep. Thank you for sailing with us tonight. May the warmth and calm of these medieval seas stay with you, guiding your dreams until morning.